our special guest performer, Macdonald, and with the person you don't see on the screen behind me, Валентин Иванов, who is the science person of the science fiction we'll be talking about. The idea of this panel came to me after the Eurocon past year, when Ian told us the story about Luna.
I'm going to tell you that story again.
So please tell us that story.
Thank God.
Come to me. I feel very low down here. Can you see me okay? I feel a tiny head sticking over a table. Yeah, it wasn't that it became obsolete, but science moved away from me. Some people have brought me copies of Luna to sign. Thank you very much, my pleasure to sign them, which is the first book in a trilogy. I did set on the moon, surprise, surprise. I had a couple of rules I wanted. First of all is that I wanted it to be basically the Godfather on the moon, so I wanted people who are trapped there, because it's always interesting to write about trapped people, you know, that you're stuck there with your worst enemies and you can't get out. That's always fun to write about. So I did a little bit of research into the science of the human body on the moon. And I'm telling you guys, it is not good for you. You lose bone density, your heart swells, your eyeballs and brain swell, your organs move to different orientations in the body. It's not good for you. And at the time I wrote the first book, which was 2012, God, 12 years ago, the thinking was that you could stay for 2 years on the moon and then you had to come back. If you stayed any longer, your body wouldn't survive coming back to Earth gravity. Now, for a writer, that's great, because that means every character has a ticking clock, and there's nothing a writer likes more than a ticking clock. Everyone has to decide, in the words of The Clash, do I stay or do I go at some point? And that makes for a good story. Breaks up relationships. Those who stay can never go back. All that. And it was a great engine for the story. But as I wrote the series, I found actually that the research is slightly different, that it doesn't actually quite work that way. I found out lots of other stuff about the moon, because research into the moon is still going on. I found out lots of other stuff that didn't quite fit with what I was writing, but I had to stick with what I was writing anyway, because I was doing a 3-part series, so I had to keep it consistent all the way through. So it's accurate. I wrote the last book in 2019, and it's accurate with 2012 science, but the science has moved on from there, and that's my story of getting caught out by science moving ahead of fiction.
Value, do you hear us? I don't hear you.
Now you should hear me.
Yeah. We do.
I was thinking a lot about what I want to say in this panel, and it dawned to me, upon me, how complex this problem actually is. Because it has at least 2 sides. One is scientific, as you already mentioned, but there is also social side of this. So, because I'm an astronomer, I will, of course, start with the astronomical example. Back more than 100 years ago, there was an American astronomer called Vespucci Slidell. Slidell is a famous person in our environment, among astronomers, because he's the guy who discovered direction. He didn't discover direction, but he realized that the lines of galaxies are shifting because of the Doppler effect, etc. But Slidell also did other things. He also studied the solar system. And he is one of the first people who took spectra of planets in the solar system. And in 1921, he published a paper where he reported a spectrum of Venus. Okay? And what he says in that paper is that Venus has very little, if any, oxygen. So you cannot be like Earth. Okay, point. And this, later on, other people continued and verified his result. In the 30s, actually, people took spectra and realized that there is something there that they don't know what it is. Turns out to be CO absorption lines, but at the time nobody knew that these lines come from the CO. It's poisonous, right? And so, imagine in the 30s, astronomers already knew that Venus is not this lush green rainforest world full of dinosaurs that science fiction writers wrote about, okay? So, even before all these books and stories from the Golden Age were actually published, even before they were written, they were obsolete, strictly speaking, because we knew, the astronomers knew that this is not the case. But of course, readers don't care, right? They want adventure, they want ticking clocks and so on and so forth. So this was, this is one example that actually, and I'm sure there are many more other examples. Like our astronomical knowledge expands gradually across the universe. More and more stuff that is being written, essentially based on inertia from the previous knowledge, from all the knowledge becomes certain. There is, of course, there are other examples, right? There is the group below the rainbow or behind the rainbow, which is a wonderful story. Written, I think you know it, written by Frederick Paul. I asked him who came up with this idea about this story, and that idea goes way ahead even the astronomy. One of the characters in that story actually mentions in passing that all galaxies have supermassive objects in their nucleus, blah blah blah. And this was not accepted until much later. Turns out the famous astronomer Alan Sandwich had actually speculated about this early on, and there was a popular article about this, and this is where Frederick Paul got the idea. But this was not in the mass science fiction. Another example that I wanted to point, and this actually perhaps is an excuse for astronomers, for science fiction writers, because other people also got left behind and fell in obstacles. And back in the 60s was a horrible time for the enthusiasts of living solar system. Because for the first time, in-situ measurements came about. And this was from the Soviet and the American space probes. And lo and behold, Venus and Mars are dead worlds, okay? It's extremely disappointing. Nevertheless, even though already there was this knowledge from astronomical ground-based observations about the nature of those worlds, the Soviets actually were still, I would not go ahead, go far to say that's why to say hope, but they were considering the possibility that Venus may be an ocean world. And on the first lander, they actually had an ocean detector. I see you're laughing, so you probably know about this stuff. It's a piece of sugar, okay, that was holding together two pieces of metal that were pushed against each other by a spoon. And if there was an ocean, this would make a contact and send the signal back to Earth saying, oh, we have an ocean here. And imagine all this, and suddenly all the 90% of the science fiction became obsolete when we took the first pictures of Mars. So I think I will stop here, and I would like to say something about the social stuff, but maybe later.
Okay. Here we go again.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. You make a very good point. It was planetary science in the 60s and 70s really screwed science fiction over. Larry Niven had a series of stories set on Mars. His assumption was because Mars was the red planet, it was covered in iron oxide. They had an entire ecosystem based on iron oxide monsters and terrifying life forms. And even as he wrote the story, he found out that it wasn't iron oxide at all, that Mars was not a rust planet, it was something else entirely. Even as he wrote the story, it became obsolete. And there were other, Larry Niven is a particularly great example for cool ideas that got killed by science. His known worlds stories. There was a thing called the Bussard ramjet. It was an interstellar engine that would pump out this massive, thousands of kilometers across electromagnetic field that would scoop in hydrogen and then fuse it to power basically power a starship close to the speed of light. It's a great idea, it's dead cool. The problem is it doesn't work, because that big electromagnetic field, rather than scooping in hydrogen, acts like a giant parachute, basically, and slows your ship down rather than allowing it to accelerate. But that didn't stop American writer Paul Anderson, who wrote a book called, I forgot the title of it. Darn, it's gone. Anyway, the book is after a nuclear exchange, Sweden now rules the world. Okay, Sweden rules the world, which is it's a terrible. I've forgotten the book. What's the book called? ABBA and Sam and Volvo and all that. But they have these interstellar Bussard ramjet starships crewed by Swedes. And one takes off, something happens, heads for a star, something happens and it can't switch the engine off. And it just gets faster and faster and faster, and gets closer and closer and closer to the speed of light. And you've got the title.
Yes, Tau Zero.
Tau Zero! Tau Zero, thank you. Yeah.
Gets faster and faster and faster, and it can't stop. Gets closer to the speed of light, and because of time dilation, time slows down until billions of years pass in seconds of the crew of the Leonora Christine, that's the name of the ship. They can't stop, they get faster and faster and faster, and they outlive the universe, and they end up, and the universe collapses back into this kind of primal, recollapses back into the Big Bang again, and they're orbiting this kind of Big Bang at the end of the universe, and they pass into the next universe, and finally they can slow down. The problem is, none of that is proper science, not one bit of it. It doesn't work that way. And I think Paul Anderson knew it at the time as well. He just wanted an idea for a space. It's a cool idea. An awful lot of science fiction works by the rule of cool. If it's a cool idea, you make it work for yourself.
Thank you.
Valo?
Okay. I think in science, the other example from hard sciences and technologies is the computer the information age, the overlooking of the information age. I actually looked up, and it turns out first device that kind of resembles a computer goes all the way back to Jonathan Swift. And he has a device called the engine that essentially plays the role of replaces the monkeys and the typewriter. Okay? What he describes is a machine that tries all possible permutations of words and letters and ends up with insanely deep philosophical and artistic books. And of course, in some ways, he has foreseen pretty much what is happening nowadays in the artistic world because of the menace of artificial intelligence. I'm afraid that we will have to learn to live somehow with artificial intelligence rather than try to forbid it. But this was completely unforeseen in science fiction. In fact, in the 30s, there were a few examples of stories and books that mentioned computers more or less in passing. But at the same time, the technology thinkers were way ahead. And the main name that comes along is Vannevar Bush. Now, Vannevar Bush was an inventor and science administrator, actually a very good science administrator. During the World War II, the period just before that, he was the head of a special department in the American government that was actually dealing with military armament/armament innovation. He was one of the early administrators of the Manhattan Project, etc., etc. So in July 1945, he published an essay in a magazine called Atlantic that still exists today. You can go to the web page and this piece is actually open and you can read it free. Where he describes an idea that has been carrying around for almost 15-20 years about what is effectively today's internet. Of course, his internet is good, okay, it doesn't have cats, dogs, pornography, and all this stuff. His internet is really about knowledge, but of course, that's a different story. What is important in the context of this panel is that science fiction ignores this. And for another 20, 30 years afterwards, until the 70s, until cyberpunk came along, essentially, the computer age, the information technologies, and the consequences and the changes in our life that they would bring were not a major topic for science fiction, which we can only regret. There are some authors who probably realized this and came up with various excuses why information technology would be forbidden, why they would be outlawed, etc., etc. Probably because out of intellectual laziness, because they don't want to go into all these things that they realize that they will be important. But this was a major problem, and there are, I can go on with other examples, I think, but generally, while science fiction has served as an inducer and motivator for some technological development, it has not been able to keep abreast with fresh ideas. I mean, it's more like a follower rather than a motivator. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
To pick you up on cyberpunk, because that's a very, very interesting area to talk about, where we didn't get to see. I'm talking to the screen, actually, talking to you people. Hello, I'm talking to you instead. Yeah, things it didn't get right. William Gibson wrote Neuromancer on a portable typewriter. He didn't write it on a word processor, he wrote it on a portable typewriter. And it's terrible about how computers actually work. No idea how computers work, he just liked the idea of what it could possibly do, and the whole ethos of cyberpunk. I think it was full of people jacking the backs of their brains into computers and finding little points where they could use and connect by wire and cable. You'd no idea how this worked, but it was just a very, very cool idea, and nothing wrong with that. And people would kind of load, kind of attack viruses into Russian computers and American computers in the Cold War, but with no idea of how you actually, that you might have to run an executable to get the virus to load into the computer in the first place, that these things just would invade and take over like biological viruses, but that computer viruses are something different. And he totally failed to predict this. So cyberpunk totally failed to predict the most cyberpunk thing there is, which is you have a complete computer in your pocket. You have you have the ultimate Renaissance machine. You can know anything you want to know if you can get a signal. Years back, there was an anthology. Terry Pratchett did a story for it. Terry Pratchett never does stories, but Terry Pratchett did a story for this. And it was basically Neuromancer, but set in Britain. So everything was a bit cheap and a bit tatty, and the policemen were wired to they had to stand in the right location and they couldn't get a signal and things like that. It was all very, very British. And in a way, I think Pratchett was much more accurate about how cyberpunk ended up than William Gibson was. There is the rule of cool, and then there's the rule of how things really work in reality. It's all shiny, but it doesn't work deep down.
I will just throw my 5 cents. In 24th or 5th or something like that, I was translating James White books about the Galactic Hospital. And they're very nice, very funny, very warm books with full of scope of very interesting stories. But there, the ship crew works with paper and no computers, and they are written in a time when computers were existing already. So it's my example of obsolete. The most funny part is that I was translating it on computer. That we didn't already work with paper anymore. So, Valo, it's your turn.
Just I would add that you can find the same thing in Stanislav Lem. You can find the same thing in Strugatsky brothers. In Stanislav Lem, he has this story, the story of Pirks, where Pirks, during a flight within the solar system, encounters essentially a dead interstellar ship. And he cannot document it because he runs out of paper in the printer. Okay, it's a very funny story in this sense. And it was, it's sad, unfortunately, that science fiction could have done more in terms of wider acceptance of this new technology. I mean, most of the time, actually, science fiction, the goal is not to accept something, but actually to prevent something, right? Somebody wise before us said that I don't want to predict the future, I want to prevent it. And so this is, I don't remember who said that, it's a quote, but it has a lot of truth inside, and it's a good point. So I see that we are already at 33, so maybe we should switch a little bit to the social side. And I was thinking about this, and I think in this sense, science fiction is probably doing better than when we talk about technology and science. Because at the moment, the science fiction is kind of split in two, right? There is in two streams. There is one that is more hopeful, more open, and there is another one that is against any changes and so on and so forth. And I'm talking about the Western science fiction. If you go historically, it's another big can of worms about how the future was perceived, etc., etc. Just we can have a number of panels about that, and we will only scratch the surface. But right now, what is interesting to me is where countries like Bulgaria fall in this very complex processes going on with the modern science fiction. And there is something that many people do not realize is that we are one of the minorities. I mean, 20 years ago would have been unthinkable to have what Genoveva Dimova did. This would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. There was just no market. The Anglos here just would not accept and would not buy a book about Bulgarian mythology and a book about that is actually using some of the Bulgarian history. I mean, there are examples of big flops that happened because of this. Andreas Eshbach, which you may know from, I keep talking about these books at various occasions because it's a very important book. He wrote an alternate history about information technology being developed at the present day level at the time of Hitler. This is impossible on so many levels, but it's really a political pamphlet rather than a science fiction book, so it's a different story. So he had a book called The Carpet Makers, and it just did not sell. It's kind of a stuff that you would expect from Ursula Le Guin, but the German name, I don't know what, it never sold well in the States. and the sequel was not translated in English. And so my interpretation of the situation is that back then the market was not ready to accept, to acknowledge the existence of this kind of any literature outside of it. Just by fact, it's not somebody who sits there and says, oh, I'm not going to suppress these Bulgarians, Germans, whatever. No, it's just an advantage of scale. And the advantage of scale has to do with the fact that the atmosphere is self-sufficient. Never mind what you want, you can find it. It's such a broad market, such a wide choice, it's and so now, because of this newly found, newly appearing openness to the other parts of the world, actually we can enjoy, and in fact I have to acknowledge this, what our guest has been doing with his books that are set in various non-Anglosphere countries, which is really, I had a lot of fun reading about Istanbul, Brazil, India, etc., etc. So this actually has changed. It's actually much, I wouldn't say easy, I would just say easier than before, to actually penetrate this, the barriers, the language barrier most of all, that sits between non-Anglosphere writers and Anglosphere market. So this aspect, this openness, was completely non-existent to the bestsellers, except books, and I would point to June. June was a book that actually dealt with this conflict. It was a bestseller, and it was a book that dealt with the conflict of cultures. It actually questioned this white man's mission, etc., etc. This is something that science fiction, except for few rare examples, did not, especially in the Golden Age. Because June was a relatively recent book, especially in the Golden Age, science fiction had very little of that. All the other planets were American suburbia and things like that. So this was, I'm sure there could be exceptions, but the dominant picture, dominant picture was, I think, like that.
Okay, yeah, please.
Thank you for your kind words on the Dervish House, which is an absolute bit of political SF. I got totally wrong, in that it's set in 2037 in Turkey, in Istanbul indeed, and it's set 10 years after Turkey joins the European Union. That ain't gonna happen anytime soon. In fact, for a brief while, I mean, I wrote a big novel set in India, I wrote one set in Brazil, and I wrote one set in Turkey. And for a brief while, each of those countries, some still do, had this totalitarian right-wing dictatorship in charge of it. And I was beginning to thinking, am I doing this? This is sort of the curse of being Macdonald. He writes about a fascist takeover. Stay away! Do not. I've written a book set in Ireland, so we will see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, that's always the problem with if you try to do any kind of near future science fiction is you will live to see your own future not come to pass. That's fine, because my job isn't to, as I said, isn't to predict, as you said, isn't to predict the future, it is to show possibilities and explore what people, what happens to people inside those possibilities. It can be political change, it can be technological change, it can be social change, or maybe all of them. But for me, science fiction is the literature of change. What happens to people inside that change? I don't have to get it right, but it has to be consistent in terms of itself. But yeah.
Okay, it is already 4:40, so I would like to stop us and open the panel for questions, if there are any, of course. Yes?
Can I speak to you?
Yeah.
You write about time. Can you tell us about the essence of time, the time of all these different times, and, for example, the X-universe is a mother of our universe?
Oh. Okay, ask
me an easy one. The question was, if I got it right, of time before time existed. Is that right? Yeah. That's something we can't know anything about. Though it's interesting of the kind of, as far as I know, the problem is for science fiction writer, it is very, very hard to keep up with the science.
Your vision about it.
Oh, yeah. Current cosmological thinking thinks that there may have been a universe before this, and that echoes of that previous universe, the time before time, are frozen into the structure of this universe. I like the idea of recurring universes quite a lot because I find the idea of entropy of just the universe dissolving away into equilibrium, cold, dark, dull equilibrium forever, rather horrifying. But endless universes has its own existential horror in it, which is that we come back in every possible human life again and again and again and again, and we live every possible human life in all these endless universes, and it never ends. So either way, I'm great. So yesterday I was scared about death. Now I'm telling you there's something worse than that. It's being cursed to come back and live all possible lives endlessly. Have a good evening.
I think you're talking about acoustic oscillation.
Yes, that's it.
This was both.
Yes.
Okay, other questions, please? Yes?
Yes, so it seems that you have quite a specialization in writing near-future science fiction, and I gather you like to do that. So I'm wondering, do you have any interesting speculations about the current near future in the few decades from now, or something that, whether they happen or not, but you think they're probable to happen?
Ooh. That's really easy.
Yes, just to clarify, it could be about any aspect of society. It doesn't have to be technology.
I think one thing that's interesting is I think the current capitalist model is falling apart. It isn't delivering what capitalism, well, in a sense it is delivering what capitalism was supposed to deliver, which is profits to shareholders, but it isn't working as a social mechanism. And I'm interested in ideas like Sophie Raworth. She's certainly Raworth. Her concept of the donut economy. Economic ideas of endless growth are, of course, nonsense, because endless growth can't exist in a universe where entropy has to maximize. You cannot have endlessly more stuff and endlessly more money in a universe where things tend towards thermodynamic equilibrium. Her idea of the donut economy is there are limits on external inputs and internal human inputs, and the economy exists like a donut inside that. I find that very interesting, and I think we'll be running into ideas of that as we hit various ecological buffers. And I was talking to a gentleman at WorldCon, and he gave me a term for these, and I can't remember what they are, but they are basically ecological stop signs. I think there's 7 of them, and we're hitting 5 of them. Things like running out of water, soils becoming exhausted, depletion of ocean resources. Climate change is a small one compared to the rest of these, but we're hitting, I think, it's either 5 out of 9 or 5 out of 7, but we are hitting them right now. I think that's something that we need to address, but the current political, and because we can't think in terms, because we can't think in long terms. These are long-term issues that require long-term thinking, but the economic and political cycle is geared on short-term delivery of results in the short-term electoral cycle. I think that's going to have to change, and ideas are emerging in economics about how we might do this. I'll just give you the microphone.
Yeah, thank you.
You look like you need the microphone.
Valu, would you like to say something on that question?
I would like to say that regretfully I couldn't hear almost anything.
Okay, it's all right.
The question is, do we have some ideas about the near future? 1, 2, speculations, near decades, for example.
I don't really want to make speculations because there are too many futures that I want to prevent. But I would point you at an essay by Charles Stross. He has a very interesting blog and he writes about this. And he essentially complained about having to rewrite a couple of his last books, which were very near future science fictions. And so, for example, he failed to predict Trump winning. And this had disastrous consequences for his book because it had parallel worlds, etc., etc. But you can only go so far about excusing your failed predictions with parallel realities, okay? And so this it's a great review. I think if you just Google Charles Stross blog, you will find it. He has a lot of interesting stuff writing. Personally, I don't like to write near future science fiction. I use science fiction as educational to do popular astronomy, etc., etc. So rather, I like science fiction about stuff that is happening a few billion years from now. Okay, it's safe for prediction. Hard to check.
Okay. So, other questions? Yes.
Well,
This is the last one, please. Защото иначе става много бавно.
I wonder if you could give us a couple of examples about science fiction books today, which are dealing with cutting-edge technologies, and which, in your opinion, seem generally compliant and in line with science and technologies today.
So the question, Valo, is about examples of books with cutting-edge technology, which are compliant for,
or at least in your opinion.
In your opinion, of course, with what is happening today, with your predictions, maybe.
For astronomy, I can point you at a book called Life Beyond Us, which is an anthology by the European Astrobiological Institute, and it's edited by somebody you guys probably know well. So this is available in the usual outlets. It's a collection of stories that try to explain different concepts of astronomy and astrobiology and search of life. I have to say, there is a disclaimer, I actually have a story there which uses game theory about explaining the searches of SETI. But this is a book that we actually made sure to be compliant with the latest stuff that is known. There is another collection called Kepler's Boson. There is a series of books by Springer that are very carefully astronomy by scientists and all, things like that, but also are very strict in the terms of science. If you want, I can put a list of books on the channel in Discord.
Please do.
Good again. Good answer. Yeah, the Springer books are very good for some. There are not enough essays by women in them. It's the only thing I would say. They need more women writing, but they are good. I have a terrible confession to make, which is I don't read very much science fiction. I'm usually reading something else. I'm usually reading research for a project I'm working on. If I read science fiction, if I think it's great, I'll try and I will steal it and copy it. And if I think it's terrible, it makes me so depressed I can't write. So I have to steer a middle ground at what I'm writing. I'm trying to think of something I've read that kind of something that did steer me was that was very good, and it's not science fiction, but it is about science. Was Richard Powers' The Overstory, won the Pulitzer Prize. It's about trees, beautiful book. It's about trees, forests. It delves into the whole kind of mycorrhizal network stuff as well. It's a very good novel that is sciencey without being science fiction. I enjoyed it very much, and it kind of steered me in a direction I wanted to go for my last book. The stuff that for a science book that absolutely changed the way I look at the world was Melvin Sheldrake's Entangled Life. In English, it's about fungus. You think fungus is boring? No, fungus is fascinating. Fungus is terrifying, and fungus is a whole different realm of life out there that we are only discovering what it is, what it can do, and what it's about. And it's one of those little books that changes the way you look at the world after you read it. And for me, that's exciting. Nothing is the same after Mervyn Sheldrake's Entangled Life.
I have also a recommendation. It is our beloved Peter Watts, who can't come to BubbleCon last 2 years. And we'll try maybe in 2-3 years to invite him again. But he has wonderful books about really close future that are unfortunately going to more or less come true. Not science fiction anymore. And with this said, I think it's time to close our show.
Thank you very much.
And send you all to drink coffee and water and relax. And the next panel is coming in 15 minutes, which will be 5:10.
We can have a long board after that. Yeah. It's like that, though.